I'm Rip Esselstyn, and you're listening to the PLANTSTRONG podcast. A recent study published in the Journal of the American Heart Association shows a win for oil-free plant-strong living, and that, my plant-strong cousins, is a big kale to the yeah from us. What exactly is the study and what did it show? We're going to talk to one of the authors, Dr. Monica Aggarwal, and get all the details right after this message from PLANTSTRONG. PLANTSTRONG family, I have some insider information for you. We are preparing to announce our 2025 retreats very soon, but as a sneak peek for you, our podcast listeners, I am thrilled to announce our spring retreat will take place in the beautiful Red Rock Mountains of Sedona, Arizona from April 6th to the 11th, and our fall retreat will take place outside of Asheville, North Carolina in majestic Black Mountain from November 9th to the 14th. If you want to learn more, go to planstrong.com and then click on Sedona or Black Mountain from our main menu selection. And if you want to join, I would encourage you to take advantage of our early bird pricing just for podcast listeners. As you all know better than anyone, it's no secret that we here at PLANTSTRONG, we're just not fans of added oil, including the most fabled and storied oil of them all, extra virgin olive oil. It's highly processed at 120 calories per tablespoon, and it also is incredibly calorie dense. In addition, you're going to hear today, it may not be as heart healthy as it's touted to be. In July of this year, the prestigious Journal of the American Heart Association published a study entitled Recipe for Heart Health, a randomized crossover trial on cardiometabolic effects of extra virgin olive oil within a whole food, plant-based vegan diet. And the results were remarkable. Participants who followed an oil-free, whole food, plant-based diet, well, they experienced greater improvements in heart health markers compared to those who included extra virgin olive oil in their diets. And the oil-free group also showed a more significant reduction in LDL cholesterol. As a reminder, that's the lethal cholesterol, which is crucial for reducing the risk of heart disease. Well, of course, I was curious to know more, so I invited one of the authors of the study, Dr. Monica Aggarwal, on the PLANTSTRONG podcast to give us all the details. So let's slide right in right now. Dr. Monica Aggarwal, welcome back to the PLANTSTRONG podcast. It's so fantastic to see your shining face. and the last time that I had you on, you were episode 67.
Oh, wow. From the baby, when your podcast was a baby.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, we were talking about this book, Body on Fire.
Yay.
That had launched. And how you basically, were able to personally fight back all this bodily inflammation that you had going on in your life, right?
Yeah, it's amazing to think. It's been, my daughter is now almost 14. And this all started for me, 3 months after she was born.
Yeah. So we have some really exciting stuff that we're going to talk about. Specifically, it's a recently published article that appeared in the Journal of the American Heart Association. But before we dive into that, I'd love just to kind of, for those that haven't been introduced to you, that don't know about you, let's just briefly talk about kind of who you are and what you do. So for starters, you're an associate adjunct professor at the Division of Cardiology at the University of Florida. How long have you been doing that?
Yeah. So, I have this crazy life, Rip, as you evidenced before we got started, because I was looking for my headphones and I live that kind of discombobulated life. So if any of you out there are like that, me, you can relate. So I am I was at the University of Florida in person for about 6 years, or 6.5 years. And then my husband said, we need to leave our Gainesville for a couple of reasons related to his work. And we ended up in Orlando. So I still do research at the University of Florida. So when you shift, when you're not there all the time, you shift from being associate professor, which is where I was actually going to go for professor. And then I shifted to adjunct just because I do my research there still. I still teach medical students and fellows, but I'm not there on a daily basis. So that's why I shifted to adjunct. It's really just a terminology thing. So I have I do a lot of publications, and I still publish under the University of Florida.
Right.
So I'm on faculty there.
And how long have you had an affiliation with the University of Florida?
Yeah, so I think I arrived from Malaysia in 2016 to Gainesville, Florida. So 2016 to present.
Wow. What were you doing in Malaysia?
I was teaching medical school as part of a program through Hopkins Hospital. So I was living in Baltimore before that, and I was offered an opportunity to teach medical school in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So I took my entire family with 3 small children and moved to Kuala Lumpur. Go figure. Who does that crazy stuff?
You
So
do.
I did. I know, me. And then I taught medical school. And then on the way back, I didn't want to come back to Baltimore for many reasons, but the temperature was certainly one of them. And so I was offered a great opportunity at the University of Florida. And so I took it.
What is it about teaching medical students that is such a passion for you?
I've always loved to teach. I'm proud that I've won many teaching awards because I do find it to be such a gratifying part of my life. Maybe because, I was a struggling med student who didn't really know her way. I could have used a lot of mentorship, and the people who were my mentors have been lifelong friends and colleagues. And so I see the value in teaching and mentorship, because if we don't teach the next generation, then who the heck is, right? And physicians are tricky people. We're super busy. We're overloaded. There's so many demands on us. But if we have to make part of that priority of our future is teaching the people coming after us, because especially in areas that they don't get very much education on, right? Which is the nutrition, which is, the area that both of us are so interested in. Is nobody's teaching them nutrition and lifestyle and the impact of that. And while everybody knows it conceptually, nobody's actually really learning it. And so I see that as part of my role. And, now, in the past, in the current, and in the future.
So as part of what you are teaching these medical students, is it nutrition? Is it whole food, plant-based? Are they, and if so, are they receptive to hearing it?
Yeah, so I teach a lot of the nutrition programming. I did it at the University of Florida. I do it at the University of Central Florida. I have fellows, residents, and medical students from both of those places that come and rotate with me. I have Advent Health family physicians that rotate with me. So, and what do I teach them? I teach them all sorts of nutrition. I teach them about lifestyle. I don't just focus on nutrition. I do a lot of lifestyle teaching, social connection, empathy, training. In terms of what I teach them nutrition wise, I teach them what the data shows. So I show them the data and I let them decide. And, we all know that the data supports plant forward eating. And so we educate them that the foundation of every meal should be plant forward.
So you mentioned Advent Health there. You're also a preventive cardiologist and lipid specialist there. Is that online? Is there a location you go to with Advent Health? How does that work?
Yeah, I'm based in Orlando. So I see patients in Orlando. So I'm a board certified lipidologist or lipid specialist. So I deal with patients who have very complex lipid disorders, but I also have patients who come to me because they've heard about me and they've been told they have advanced heart disease and they want a second opinion. Some of them come from your dad, which is always fun when Essie sends me a patient. And so they could be any one of those kinds of patients, but I see them in Orlando and specifically in an area called Winter Park.
So recently you were you appointed or elected? How did that work? The nutrition chair at the American College of Cardiology.
Yeah, so the American College of Cardiology is our big society of cardiologists that we all look to for guidance, guideline management, our education. So much of it comes from the American College of Cardiology. And so recently I was elected, nominated as to be the nutrition chair, which is exciting. So, I been on that committee for several years, and some of my dearest friends are on there. People like Kim Williams, Neil Barnard, Rob Osfeld, friends of all of ours are all on our committee. And so this last year, or actually this summer, I was nominated to be the chair.
That's great. And as the chair and as part of the American College of Cardiology, I mean, you guys are working on policy changes on the national level regarding nutrition. That must be pretty darn exciting.
It's very exciting. It's hard work. I mean, there's so much bureaucracy and infrastructure that you have to sort of overcome. And, but, I think if we keep pushing forward, Neil's on the group, and Darius Mazafarian, and they're really interested in policy. And so having moving forward medical education and medical nutrition policy is an area of focus that I have. Steve DeVries, who's a great friend and is really involved in medical education. So we've just sub-appointed him as the new education person. So education chair. So he's going to help me build education in medical schools, residencies, fellowships. And he's done such a great job with his Gaples Institute, and really admire his work. And then I have I've appointed a sub chair for fellows in training to sort of then help with because I'm a strong believer, as you noted, I'm a strong believer in mentorship. And so then building up that new cohort of early faculty is a great joy. And so it's been fun to kind of put together these subcommittees so that we can really make impact in a few specific areas, which are passions of mine and of many of the people. I think it's such a massive project, and people probably don't realize how massive working in this area of nutrition is, because there's so many non-believers and there's so much misinformation out there, right? Many people are getting their information from TikTok videos and social Instagram, and they think that this is correct knowledge. And so we're fighting against that social media component. Then there's the people that are in the places who maybe don't, or who maybe are involved in policy, but they may not fully understand the areas that maybe they don't have this expertise in prevention or in nutrition. And so our job is to then impact and educate in a very positive, supportive way, because we all are good at what we're good at, right? And it's there are many things I'm terrible at that I learn from other people. So everything is meant to be supportive, out of love, out of all of us growing together.
All right, so Monica, let's dive into this recently published article. And it's called A Recipe for Heart Health, a randomized crossover trial on cardiometabolic effects of extra virgin olive oil within a whole food, plant-based vegan diet.
Mouthful.
Yeah, it really is. But let's, just so that the audience can understand, I want to pick it apart a little bit.
Yeah.
So a randomized. What does that mean, randomized? What does that word mean?
So you don't know, when you use the word randomize, it's very important to us when we do clinical trials to randomize our people. So you don't know if you're going to get so in a medication trial, for instance, randomized would mean either you get the medicine or you might get the placebo. And it's important because people don't realize that so much of people feeling better is actually placebo effect. And so when you have a placebo arm, then you're avoiding or reducing that. Obviously, in a nutrition trial, we don't really do a placebo effect. We don't have a placebo in the way you're thinking, but when we randomize them, we pick the people, and whether they got a high or low olive oil as their first intervention was the part that was randomized.
And then crossover. What does the word crossover mean?
So again, in nutrition studies, there's so much nuance, because the way I eat, the way I respond to a spaghetti squash, and you respond to a spaghetti squash, or I don't know, oatmeal or something is going to be different. We have different gut bugs. We have different environmental factors. And so all of these stressors and all these things impact you versus me. And so how do I know that your LDL may be 100 and mine might be 70? You know, not to say I have no idea what your LDL is, just so we're clear. But, you know, yours might be that and mine might be 70. And then when we give you the food, then the impact on you might be different than the impact on me, right? And so it's really important in nutrition studies in particular to use each person as their own control. So in other words, when you start on your Western diet, we put them into a nutrition intervention, then they go through and we compare their data to themselves.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So how did this come to being? Was this your brainchild, this study, and why? Why do this study?
It was my brainchild because I think so many years I've you know, I'm always somebody who likes to ask questions. And so one of the things that's continued to bother me is whether, you know, so what we know about nutrition, if we step back, is that plant forward eating is optimal for patients with heart disease. There should be no debate about this, no matter if the keto people are wrong, the paleo people are wrong. It's a plant forward diet. And so when you look at a Mediterranean diet, which is a plant forward diet, you know, we know that there's loads of data that shows there is a reduction in events when you eat Mediterranean. And it's gotten so much hype. We've had huge trials, the PREDIMED study, 7,000 patients. We had the Leon Heart study. I mean, there's just so many studies that have been showing, and then more and more individual studies after that showing that the Mediterranean diet is good. But the Mediterranean diet is, you know, 30 to 40% fat, as you know. And so, and there's all these pieces in that diet that I don't really fully understand. And so then there's a plant forward diet. And what I wanted to understand, which is about 10 to 15% fat often, I wanted to understand, is it that everybody in the Mediterranean diet is just eating more plant forward and that's why they're getting better? Or is it that any plant forward diet good for you? And if you add a little olive oil and a little bit of fish or whatever, does that matter? So I wanted to take a piece of the diet, and the Mediterranean diet in particular, that's been most of interest to me, which is extra virgin olive oil. And as you may know, in a Mediterranean diet, there's often a liberal use of extra virgin olive oil. You probably all know people that eat olive oil for their health, or they'll put it in, dip it on bread, and then eat the bread and say, well, I'm eating it for my health, or add it to a salad for your health. And so I wanted to understand specifically, does the olive oil itself, like, are there pieces of this diet that make it better? In other words, is it that we've just moved everybody to plant forward and that's why everybody's doing better? Or is there specific pieces that are like, oh, it's this piece. If you just eat anything else and you just add this piece, you're going to make people better. So that's something I've always wanted to understand. So I decided to run a study to look specifically at extra virgin olive oil. And so that's where that came from.
Well, I think it's absolutely brilliant what you were able to do. And you started all this in like 2021, probably in the middle of COVID, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Oh yeah, it was super hard. I mean, it was super hard to do this study. It was super hard because, exactly right, we were literally doing this in the middle of an epidemic, right? So it took longer to recruit for sure, but it was very interesting. People loved this study. You know, we had such good adherence to our study because we had added a nuanced component of education and community that I think even I didn't fully grasp how impressive that piece was going to be.
Yeah. Can you let us know? I've read it and it's super impressive, but can you let the listener know about the kind of the methods, the cohort, how many people were in the study, their ages, male, female, all that jazz?
Sure. So what we wanted to look at adults. So we really looked at anybody 18 and older, but it was really average age was about in the 60s, as is usual. Most people were women, and which is also very common in studies, especially nutrition studies. We looked at patients who had at least borderline risk of heart disease. So we have a risk calculator that we as cardiologists use. We can put in your blood pressures and your cholesterol and your age, and then it spits out a risk profile of low, borderline. And so we wanted people who had some risk features of heart disease, but we didn't include people who actually had known heart disease, and that was so we had some criteria for that. And because what I didn't want to do is I wanted to use a group of people that maybe weren't on statins and had weren't on, because most of our secondary prevention patients or people with heart disease will be on statins. And so I wanted to use a cohort of people that maybe weren't on medications or weren't on statins in particular. So I took 40 people and I put them through a randomized crossover design study. So we took 20 people and we put 20 people that were randomized to high olive oil. And I'll tell you what that means in a minute. And they would have to eat that way. So they had to eat 100% plant-based diet with high olive oil for 4 weeks. And then we washed it out, and then we put that same group of people on 100% plant-based diet with low olive oil.
When you say a 1 week washout, what exactly does that mean?
Oh, so we put a washout in place, which means basically we ask people to go back to their old diet for that 1 week in between, because we wanted to sort of start the numbers. So if you can imagine, this is the negative of crossover design, is if you start here on a Western diet and then you go down to here with a plant-based diet with high olive oil, then it's hard to then assess the second part of the intervention because they've already come down to here. If you start here and you change just a little bit, you might only see this much change. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So with that, you try to wash them out. So you hope that they kind of go back up so that you can still see the notable impact. But you'll see in our data, in particular, we struggle with crossover issues because people didn't wash out completely. And this is often a struggle in nutrition studies because who wants to go back to those old unhealthy habits? And so what happens often is people cross over, they don't fully wash out. And then you see a less impact in the second part of the intervention. And we definitely suffered from that during the study.
I would imagine. I mean, 4 weeks of eating whole food, plant-based, this, low oil or even the
high olive oil.
the high amount, I would imagine. Wow, they probably felt so much better.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, people were so happy in the study. And remember, we added this education and community component. So then you're in this group of people of 8 to 10 people, which was each cohort was about 8 to 10 people that you meet every week. You're on Zoom together. You're literally, during some of the classes, people would pull up. They'd be like, what do I do with these oats? And then everybody else weighs in. Like, it was this lovely community. So much so that when people finished their 8 weeks, they shared numbers. They exchanged numbers so they could continue to correspond and speak to people. And these were people of different demographics, social economic status, different ethnic groups. And it was just so cool. And my favorite part, actually, of the intervention is how much community and connection we created. And I think, again, we talk about this, but I think it's so undervalued how much the connection and community is to promoting adherence.
Yeah. Okay, so what was the difference in the amount of fat in the two groups?
Well, so the high olive oil. So remember, we put everybody on a 100% plant-based diet. They all were on a Western diet. We put them on a 100% plant-based diet. So, a huge difference already. But we were worried about the fat. And because many people will say, well, you just cut their fat. That's why you saw an improvement in their our primary endpoint, which was LDL reduction. Now let's step back a little. What is LDL? LDL is the bad cholesterol. It's responsible for pulling atheroma or plaque inside the blood vessels. We know that from the cholesterol trialist study that if you drop an LDL by 39.2 milligrams per deciliter, so 39.2, you can reduce mortality or improve people's living by 22%. So it's like a surrogate endpoint. It helps you, it's sort of an outcomes it can be extrapolated to outcomes. So we really like an LDL reduction, especially when we talk about statins. Remember, we talk about a 30 to 50% reduction with a moderate intensity statin. We use those percentages. So using an LDL endpoint was important. So we gave patients 100% plant-based diet. So this is these weren't people were not eating processed foods. I'm sure there were some dietary discretions, but overall they were eating plant. We provided them with oil. We gave them gift cards every week so that they could buy those plant-based foods if they were expensive. And then we put, again, that high olive oil, we'd eat about 4 tablespoons of oil per day. And that's a lot. That was a struggle for some people because remember, in the American way is not to eat so much olive oil, and in the Mediterranean region, it's very common, and that wouldn't be considered odd. In fact, that's considered very common in the Mediterranean area. That's why we picked that number, because it's been used in other studies. Whereas the American diet is much less oil. In that raw form, I should clarify. And we used the other low oil cohort was less than a teaspoon. So when you think about that, this oil, we wanted them to drink it. We wanted it raw. We wanted it uncooked. And so some people struggled with how to get that oil into their system for sure.
Oh, I would imagine. I mean, I think just to put it into perspective, I'd say most Americans are probably getting 3 to 5 tablespoons of oil a day, but including in their package, their box, their
Right.
canned foods, and then if they're having a salad or stir fry or whatever. So interesting. And also, uncooked in its raw form. And you said the high group was getting how many tablespoons a day?
4.
Four. So 4 times 120, do the math on that. That's how many calories, Monica?
Yeah.
500, 520, right?
I'm the worst at math.
Well, it's 520 calories. I mean, that's almost 25%, I would imagine, of their daily caloric intake.
And that's what makes it tricky though, too, right? Because if we're trying to do a study where we don't adjust fat significantly. So what I was trying to do was not reduce fat too much, because if you reduce fat so much, then people will say that it's because you reduce the total fat and not because I wanted to specifically understand, is there something special about olive oil, like the the flavonoids, the phytonutrients inside olive oil, not the flavonoids, the phytonutrients that are inside olive oil, where they in particular make this thing so special that we should be eating it on a regular. And so I wanted actually to not have such a difference in fat. Unfortunately, we did have a statistically significant reduction in fat between the high and low olive oil group, which is a criticism of the study. But, when we looked at weight loss, interestingly, it wasn't that much difference. I think it was less than a kilo in both between the groups. So we were actually fairly happy that we got, even in the low olive oil group, we had the fat intake at about 32%, and about in the high olive oil, it was about 42 to 45. I haven't looked at the study in a few weeks, so it may not be the exact number. Don't quote me on it if I said 42 and it was 45, but somewhere about those numbers. And so so both of those arguably are not low fat, right? And so that was important to us. So I wanted to, when we get criticism about this, like, well, you have a significant fat disparity. Yes. But both of them are fairly high fat diets, and the weight difference wasn't that significant. And so what I think is important and what you show there is that it's not that because we reduced the fat so much that we saw such a significant reduction in LDL.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was 48% on
Thank
the
you.
high group, and it was 32% on the low group. But how are you able to come up with that? Were they keeping a food log of everything they were eating? Okay.
Yep. We had very meticulous. So my PhD student, who's now a full-time PhD now, Dr. Andrea Krennick, it's nice to call her doctor. She's actually moved on to work in Chris Gardner's lab at Stanford, which is wonderful. She was very involved in the study and she actually was the nutritionist who also ran the programming. And she did a meticulous accounting of what everybody was eating.
Right. Well, and I'm sure you're aware that, my father with his patients and Dean Ornish and some others, they actually they consider a low fat about 10 to 15% of calories.
That's exactly right.
Right.
And so, that's what I think is one of the pieces that makes this study so interesting, is that they didn't have a 10%, right? And so, because then that's what a lot of people criticize when you eat a low fat diet. And well, of course it's low fat, that's why you made an impact. But I wasn't asking that question. I was trying to specifically ask, is the olive oil itself so great?
Yeah. And so what were some of the measurements that you found as far as the benefits of doing the lower olive oil as opposed to the higher olive oil?
So first of all, we looked at a lot of clinical endpoints and markers rather. We specifically was driven by LDL, right, which is what we talked about. But we looked at HDL, we looked at triglycerides, we looked at sugars, we looked at something called lipoprotein little a, ApoB. So for people who are sort of science nerds like me, fructosamine, glucose, hsCRP, and TMAO. And a lot of the data was interesting trending, and all trended in the direction of the LDL, but some of it wasn't statistically significant. The most impactful thing we found in a nutshell is that there was a more significant LDL reduction in the low olive oil group than the high. So in other words, if you were on a standard Western diet and then you went to a low olive oil group, you would have almost a 25.5 milligram per deciliter reduction in LDL. That's huge. And then if you were in the high olive oil group, you only had about a 10 to 15 point drop, right? So there's a significant difference in the drop in LDL when you go low olive oil to high. And remember, to remind you again, these were not people that were eating low fat, but it was the form of the fat they were getting that's most impactful. And so these people were all eating whole foods like avocados and tofu and sort of things that were high in fat, but they weren't necessarily high in they weren't extra virgin olive oil, and they were not things that were not affecting LDL. And so we saw a more significant reduction. They are also higher fiber. We actually looked back at the amount of fiber intake. The people that were eating the low olive oil group had an excess amount of fiber in their diet, which was amazing, which remember, we all know that fiber reduces LDL.
Well, I mean, so none of what you've just said is really surprising to me, except I'm actually surprised that the LDL cholesterol it was only 10 points. I would have thought it would have been even more than that. And the reason I say that is because, and Monica, I want to talk to you about this specifically when we're done talking about your trial. I just see olive oil is the equivalent of white sugar in the fat world. I don't think that there's really hardly anything beneficial about it. It's 14% saturated fat, and we know that saturated fat raises cholesterol levels and LDL. And so if people are consuming on average 4 added tablespoons of olive oil a day, I mean, I'm trying to think what's the protective substances, mechanisms in that olive oil that people are just kind of chirping about right now. Oh, I saw this study that it was 3 years long and people that were eating olive oil did this and this. So I don't want to get off track right now on that. But so I think everything you said makes complete sense to me.
Yeah. I think the thing though, that, there's not a more significant drop. I mean, you have to remember that people were eating this badly and then they both went plant-based. Right. And so the plant-based eating is what we should be emphasizing to all of our patients. And I think that's what I want people to take away from this study is that we want people to eat more plant-based, period. So like, there's no question that both groups, high and low olive oil, had significant improvement when they moved away from the standard diet to a plant-based diet. So we need everybody to eat plant-based. That's not just you or maybe you, and only because you have heart disease. It's everybody. And then on top of that, maybe oil, and specifically extra virgin olive oil, is not so great. And that's not something we should be adding for our health. So I, unlike you, I think, Rip, a little bit, as I don't mind if people eat a little bit of olive oil here or there in their meals, or not even olive oil, but oil, if they feel like they need it. But less oil is better. And I think that what I really like about this study, and what I was most proud of, was that this oil that, you're right, is considered this golden oil. Maybe it isn't so great. So I think that's what I want people to take away, is that we're seeing a significant LDL reduction just from going plant-based, but even more so when you eat less oil and not necessarily less fat, right? Because these are people that are still eating fatty food, but they're eating it in whole form. They're eating it in whole form. And that's the key. So eat those whole foods. You don't have to cut your calories down. That's why so many of us don't say, yeah, count your calories or adjust this. We just want you to eat those whole foods, right? And so I want people to eat whole foods. And I just don't want them, as you pointed out, to get them in this highly concentrated form of oil. And to me, truthfully, I say that for all oils. And so, all of the oils need to be reduced in amount because it's a concentrated form. So eat 5 olives, eat 20 olives, you still won't get what you're getting from the 4 tablespoons of olive oil, right? And so it puts things into perspective that whole foods, plant-based, this is optimal for eating. There should be no debate about that. And then on top of that, please don't add the oil for your health.
Yeah. Yeah. So first, how exciting that you were able to dream this up, get the funding, make it happen. And you're what, 3.5, 4 years later, right?
Yeah, it was a long time before we got it published.
Yeah.
But it's so cool. The Journal of American Heart Association is considered one of the best journals in the world for cardiology. And we were proud that they felt it was, despite its negatives. I mean, again, anybody who's a scientist who's listening to this is going to say, well, these are the negatives. I agree. There were definitely issues with our crossover design, the length of the study. We needed a longer washout. I agree with all the more finite measurement of fat intake in the future for next studies, but nobody can discount what we found. And this should be the impetus for somebody to do the study again, but with double the people and a longer washout. But I think that there's no question that there's a trend here that needs to be evaluated, monitored, and we should be eating oils with caution.
Yeah. So based upon what you put yourself through here in the last, 3.5, 4 years, are you excited, motivated to do another study?
I think so. I mean, it's definitely, research is a labor of love for sure. But it is pretty impactful stuff. Right. And, we debunked something, or at least started the conversation about something that people have automatically assumed is good. And so we've just sort of said to the question, really, is it that good? And so people haven't really asked that question. So we're proud to be one of the first people who've ever asked that question. So do I want to run the study bigger and better? Heck yeah. Do I have the funding for it? No. And unfortunately, it's very hard to get funding for nutrition studies. And so we definitely struggle with that in general. And everyone in the world struggles with funding when it comes to nutrition, because it is challenging work. And remember, there's no pharmaceutical at the end of it where you get to prescribe a drug and yet make the money off of it, right? So that's how pharmaceuticals work. But unfortunately, it's just nutrition, right? It's just eat better. But there's nothing to market there.
And if this is something that you don't want to share, I completely understand. But what was the budget for this study?
I would have to check exactly, but it was over 100,000, maybe 150.
Oh, that doesn't sound bad.
Yeah. I mean, we did it pretty bare bones, but remember, we only had 40 people.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so if I were to do it again, I would want to do several hundred people. I would want to do a longer washout period. I would like to have more control of fat intake. And that's always a little bit tricky, which would require dietitians to really help us almost in each individual. So that would take a little bit more work, but all doable. But it's expensive.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd love to talk to you right now specifically about olive oil. And I have some questions for you. And so as you heard me say earlier, I just think it's empty calories. I just literally think it's the equivalent of what white sugar is in the carbohydrate world, is in the fat world. Like you said, it's the most concentrated source of calories on the planet. It's really, for the most part, got no fiber, no vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients. Now, when I ask people what is it about olive oil that you find healthy, they typically say two things. They say it's loaded with polyphenols and it's got antioxidants. So, and I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you have any idea how many polyphenols are in a tablespoon of olive oil?
So, it's interesting. So I think that first of all, olive oil, and olive oil, three different olive oils are totally different, right? In terms of what the polyphenol content is different in all of those. So that's one thing in the study, because people have asked, we used a moderate level polyphenol content. And so, because we wanted to use something that people get over the counter, right? We didn't want to get something super hard to get, et cetera. So with that in mind, I don't know what to do with that information, right? So that's the thing, and that's what's tricky about. There are some studies out there that say that these high polyphenol count these are higher polyphenol count olive oils, and I don't want to discount some of the studies that are out there that do show that certain olive oils are better than others, but I don't still then know what to do with that information, because the studies aren't designed the way, they're not put on a plant-based diet when they are then given, so that you could specifically look at the olive oil, right? And so that's the problem with so many of the designs. And so when people say these are high in antioxidants and polyphenols, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe, because it's hard to know also how much that translates into actually each person, like what's bioavailable and what's not. So I do believe that, because we know that olives have benefits, that there is some benefit in oils or in olive oil, but whether that's significant or not, I think this study in particular certainly doesn't show that it drives or good for LDL reduction. Now, in this new study that we write, we would put in new Alzheimer's criteria, would put in other criteria to show that maybe the oil in all these these other disease states was also not beneficial. And I'd love to add those components to it. But for now, and I know you're putting them on the spot to say, like, would you, is it? And I would say to you that, I think that an olive is good for you. The concentrated form maybe has some nutrient quality, but is it impactful in heart disease? I would say no.
Yeah. Well, and I think you said this earlier. I mean, we want everybody to eat more whole plant-based foods. And
Yeah.
I don't know of a world where olive oil is somehow healthier than the whole food that it comes from, right?
Like, this would be a no-brainer. Eat the olives. If you want olive oil, eat olives.
Yeah. So
You know?
let me give you an example, because I think that, I did a little research,
Yeah.
and I found it to be absolutely mind-blowing when people say it's loaded with polyphenols. So obviously different olive oils will vary depending upon where it's from and all that stuff. But on average, your average 100 grams, which is 400 calories, 100 grams, which is also 3.5 tablespoons, it will give you 55 milligrams of polyphenols. Okay. Now, you could have 8 olives. 8 olives will give you the same amount, and that's only 50 calories. So 50 versus 400 to give you the exact same amount of polyphenols. So
Plus the fiber intake, right? Right. Think about the fiber and all the other I mean, yeah.
And so anyway, I find that to be like, okay, people are doing it. It has nothing except polyphenols. Okay, but minuscule. The other thing people say is, well, it's got antioxidants. Well, it really doesn't. So you look it up. It's got 0 vitamin A. Well, I mean, there's 4 basically things that make up antioxidants for the most part: A, C, E, and selenium. It's got 0 vitamin A. It's got 0 vitamin C. It's got 0 selenium. And guess what? It's got trace amounts of vitamin E. And I did the math because I found it to be so fascinating. So guess how many milligrams of vitamin E are in 1 tablespoon of olive oil?
Oh boy, it's got to be
1.9 milligrams.
wow.
So the two things, polyphenols and antioxidants, but the only antioxidants that's there is vitamin E. They're in such trace amounts that if you were to try and do that and to equate it to a whole food equivalent, you'd be having to do, 16 to 32 ounces.
I would just change the way you say it, Rip, and just say relative to what you can be getting from a whole food plant-based diet and those natural sources, there's no comparison. But you separately, olive oil, yeah, it's has some polyphenols. We can't ignore that. But relative to what you can get from eating plant-based foods, like that should be the conversation, I think. And I think that people are more responsive to that conversation when you see it that way. And the only other thing I was going to say is we should write this up in like a little blog. You know, we can put in the study, but then we can put in these calculations you put in, and then put it out there, because people should see those numbers. And I thought that was really great that you put those numbers together.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I just, yeah, I just find it to be such a mind melt. The way people take a little bit of polyphenols and all of a sudden it makes it into a health food.
Right.
When it is, like we've talked about, it's just it's crazy. So
I think, take away the right thing, right? And so, take away the right thing, which is eat more plant-based, eat lots and lots of whole foods. Don't focus on eating these concentrated forms of anything, because they're not usually going to be as good as their original. Just eat the original. I mean, that's what we need. We're the original vegetable eaters, the original gangsters. We're the OVs, we're original vegetables.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I have a couple questions for you from our Plant Strong audience, because they knew I was going to be talking to you today. So this one comes from Pamela, and she says, "Thank you so much for this article, Dr. Aggarwal. I understand the value of this lifestyle for cardiovascular health, but I wonder about the effect of no oil on brain health, cognitive function over time. Years ago, I had an initial consult with a cardiac wellness doctor at Montefiore Einstein Center, and he really could not answer this question for me. So I'm hoping that in 15 years since then, there might be more ability to answer that question."
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that I would like to just say it's a non-issue, but until I do the study, I don't know for sure. I think that, if you look at the qualitative data and people that are eating these low-fat diets, their brain function's great, right? And so, but do I have a study to sort of show that specifically about olive oil? I don't. I think people do have this obsession, though, with, fat and like needing a certain amount. And people often say to in my clinic, they'll say, "Hey, I have this, I need a certain amount of LDL for my brain to function, or I need a certain amount of cholesterol for my brain to function." I'm like, "Oh, okay, hold the phone." So when you're, you need a little bit of cholesterol to build cell membranes, right? But your LDL when you're born is 40 to 50. And so if you can make a baby into an adult with an LDL of 40 to 50, why do we need any more than that at any other time?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing that I would add on to that is that just because you're not adding any oil, or let's say less than a teaspoon a day, as you so aptly showed in this study, doesn't mean that you're not getting any fat in your diet, right? I mean, these people were getting 32% of their calories from fat. So there's fat in everything, right?
Right. And so I think we focus so much that we're going to lose brain function if we cut back too much on oils. But no, I mean, if you eat the whole foods, you're going to be just fine. Like, just eat the whole foods. Your brain's going to develop fine. Everything's going to be good and fine. Will I have the clear scientific data that I can do this same study on an Alzheimer's group? It would be fun.
Yeah. Dr. Aggarwal, I am oil-free, but many of my oil-free plant-based friends are confused about olive oil because Dr. Kim Williams and Dr. Joel Kahn both say olive oil is good due to a recent study that they read about it. Dr. Williams says a small amount is beneficial for non-overweight individuals due to the polyphenol content in olive oil.
Yeah, I know exactly what study he's talking about. Kim and I have talked about that study, and it's interesting. In people who are not overweight, those people did do better with a little bit of oil. I seem to remember their blood pressure was the thing that was impacted. I'd have to relook. And so Kim and I have talked about that study. Look, these are all pieces of the puzzle. And so what Kim is saying is, based on this study, we know that a little bit of olive oil in these non-overweight people wasn't a bad thing. But 70% of the world is overweight and obese, right? And so most of the people aren't in that category. And so maybe they could eat a little bit more oil in their diet, maybe. But my study is another study that really looks at another group of people with their BMI was all elevated in the overweight category. So all of these people, they're just different pieces of the puzzle. And so if you are, for instance, this underweight person and you need to get fat, I prefer you get it from whole foods. But if you eat a little bit more oil, maybe there's more flexibility in your diet for you than for somebody who has a BMI of 27 and he's at risk for heart disease.
Mm-hmm.
Every case has to be taken in isolation. And, I don't think that there's one rule. And, Kim and I are, literally talk twice a week sometimes. And so we talk about these studies, and he's the first one who sent me an applause letter, applause text message to say, great job on that study. So he and I are not, they're not fighting each other. He's not saying olive oil is good, and so wait, this is debunking that. No, he's saying in this sub-select category, in this study, there was a slight improvement when they had some olive oil. So that's just another piece of information. But again, those are that 30% of our population who are not overweight, and so I guess I just want people to take that with a grain of salt too, is that these are just pieces of the puzzle. I think what we should take away from this is that for the 70% of people that are overweight or obese, they shouldn't be eating olive oil if they're at risk for heart disease. And in general, and even with that lower weight class, why not eat them from your whole foods?
Yeah. Tell me if you agree with this statement that I'm going to make here, and then I'm going to let you go. And that is, I think that olive oil, and really any oil for that matter, it's like alcohol. I think that the least amount is the most healthy amount. And with alcohol, what is it? It's like least, it's a zero amount. And I think whole food, plant-based, minimal to low oil is it. And I don't know why there has to be all this arguing about it.
Well, I think people want to live in the middles, and we have a lot of gray zones in nutrition, and people like the gray zone because it allows them to have certain, things that they normally do. And I have no judgment there. There's certain things. I love dark chocolate, so, we all have sort of things that we want to kind of live in that gray zone for. I think that everybody should continue to take away that more plant-based is better. Yes. And if you can just focus on that piece, then everything else won't matter so much. And a little bit of this or a little bit of that. I always tell people this, when people quote me, a little bit of this or a little bit of that, I don't really care about, as long as your foundation is plant-based.
I couldn't agree with you more. The thing that obviously you can tell irks me the most is that we have olive oil masquerading around like it's this Mediterranean health food, and it's not. I just want people to know, if you want to anoint it because you like it on it adds spices and you like the flavor and allow you to eat more, fine. But no, it's not a health food.
Yeah, I think that's what you take away, and do what you want with the other stuff. I said I don't sweat the small stuff. I really focus on the big picture here, and what this tells me is that a little bit of olive oil, maybe okay. A lot of oil, certainly not needed.
Yeah. Well, Monica,
such a pleasure.
It really was. Thank you so much, and huge congrats on getting this.
Thank you.
Out there. Yeah,
it's been great. Hey, thanks so much.
Give me a Plant Strong fist bump on the way out. Boom. Yeah.
Take care.
Bye. I know you all can tell I am just a little passionate about this subject. Eliminating oils, even just for a short time, can have a profound effect on biomarkers, including inflammation, cholesterol, blood pressure, and weight management. This is good news, and we hope that you find this as encouraging as we do here at Plant Strong. If you found this useful, please share it with friends and loved ones who may benefit. Until next week, let's keep putting the plant back in plant-based, and always keep it plant strong. The Plant Strong podcast team includes Carrie Barrett, Lori Kordowich, and Amy Mackey. If you like what you hear, do us a favor and share the show with your friends and loved ones. You can always leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And while you're there, make sure to hit that follow button so that you never miss an episode. As always, this and every episode is dedicated to my parents, Dr. Caldwell B. Esselstyn Jr. and Ann Cryo Esselstyn. Thanks so much for listening.